Hey guys, tonight we are going to wrap ourselves in the quiet strength, the subtle influence, the soft power of ancient Filipino textiles. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture humid air heavy with the scent of earth and rain, the rustle of giant leaves in a forest that has stood for millennia. Feel the rough bark of a tree under your fingertips, the cool dampness of a stone riverbed. Imagine threads not spun from fluffy sheep's wool, because spoiler alert, not a lot of sheep running around in the ancient Philippines, but from the very plants and trees that surround you. Tough fibers pulled from leaves, bark and stalks, transformed by patient hands into something intricate, beautiful and profoundly meaningful. We're talking about fabrics that weren't just clothes, they were identity, history and magic woven together. Just a heads up, this might actually be too relaxing, and you probably won't survive staying awake through the whole thing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're peeling back the layers of time, sinking back through the centuries, long before hashtags or even, written history as we often think of it. You're standing on the shores of an archipelago, a scatter of islands kissed by the sun and constantly reshaped by the waves. The air is thick and warm, carrying the distant sound of the ocean and the closer buzz of insects. It's a world woven not just from thread but from interconnectedness, people, plants, spirits and stories. And at the heart of so many of these connections lies the quiet hum of the loom. Think about what you're wearing right now. Cotton, polyester, maybe something fancy like silk or linen. You probably didn't grow it yourself, harvest the fibers, spin the yarn or weave the fabric. You probably bought it from a shop, maybe ordered it online. It's functional, maybe fashionable, but does it tell a story about your lineage? Does it ward off evil spirits? Does it mark you as a leader or a warrior or someone ready for marriage? Probably not. For the ancient peoples of these islands, textiles were doing all of that, and then some. They were the original personal branding, but way more spiritual and scratchier probably. The absolute earliest evidence of textile production in the Philippines is a little tricky to pin down precisely. We're talking about organic materials, things that tend to decay and disappear in humid tropical environments. Unlike stone tools or pottery shards, fabric doesn't stick around for thousands of years unless the conditions are just right. So archaeologists aren't digging up complete wardrobes from 5000 BC. Instead, they're looking for indirect clues, small bone or shell tools that look like they could have been used for processing fibers. Impressions in pottery that show the texture of woven mats or fabric. Sometimes, if they're incredibly lucky, tiny fragments of preserved textile, often found pressed against metal objects or buried in specific kinds of soil that slow down decomposition. One of the mainstream historical facts we rely on comes from sites like the Taban Caves in Palawan. You might have heard of the Taban Man, one of the oldest human remains found in the Philippines. While they didn't find his fabulous ancient outfit preserved next to him, excavations in these and other sites have unearthed tools that archaeologists strongly suspect were used for weaving or related crafts. These include things like bone needles and potential tools for stripping fibers. Finding these kinds of tools in layers of earth dated back several thousand years suggests that textile production, in some form, was happening very early in the history of human settlement here. It wasn't like one day someone woke up and said, "Eureka! Pants!" It was a gradual evolution of skill, likely brought by waves of migration and adapted to the abundant local resources. The origins of weaving itself are pretty fundamental to human civilization globally. The need to create coverings, containers, and connections led people everywhere to figure out how to interlace flexible materials. In the Philippines, given the environment, this likely started with simple mat weaving using reeds or grasses, and then evolved into more complex techniques using tougher plant fibers for cloth. Think about it. You need something to carry things, something to sit on, something to wear to protect yourself from the sun or insects. Weaving is a logical solution using readily available materials. It's the original DIY project, but instead of a wonky bookshelf, you get, potentially wonky loincloths at first. But you got to start somewhere, right? Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some researchers speculate that the very concept of weaving might have arrived with the earliest Austronesian migrations to the islands, carrying with them not just sailing technology but also fundamental crafts like pottery and textile making. It's a bit like how certain words or myths show up across different islands, hinting at a shared ancient origin. Imagine a small group arriving on a new shore, and among their most prized possessions isn't just food or tools for survival, but maybe a bundle of processed ware or a simple backstrap loom, symbols of a sophisticated craft they carried across the ocean. It suggests that weaving wasn't necessarily invented independently on each island, but rather a core technology dispersed throughout the region, then adapted and elaborated upon in unique ways. This isn't just a fringe idea, it connects the Philippines into a much larger ancient maritime world, where people were exchanging not just goods but knowledge and technology across vast distances. Historians still argue whether the earliest textile production was primarily for practical purposes, like basic clothing and shelter, or if it held deeper symbolic or spiritual meaning right from the start. Was it purely about survival, covering your modesty, or staying warm or cool? Or did the act of weaving itself, the creation of patterns, the use of specific colours, immediately carry significance beyond the functional? It's hard to know without written records from that far back. We have to infer from later practices, from the continuity of cultural traditions that might have echoes of ancient beliefs. Did those first simple weaves contain protective patterns? Were certain fibres already associated with specific spirits or powers? It's a fascinating puzzle. You look at later cultures in the region where textiles are profoundly spiritual and symbolic, and you wonder if that wasn't baked into the process from the very beginning. Dating these early findings is another challenge. Radiocarbon dating helps us date the organic materials or charcoal found alongside the tools, giving us a time frame for human activity. But a bone tool itself doesn't scream, "I was used for weaving." It requires interpretation based on wear patterns, context within the archaeological layer, and comparison with tools used by historical or contemporary indigenous groups. So when archaeologists say they found evidence of early weaving, they're often piecing together a puzzle from fragments, educated guesses, and comparative studies. It's less like finding a sign that says "Weaving Workshop, S10 3000 BC", and more like finding a tiny worn bone next to some plant residue and saying, this looks suspiciously like something you'd use to scrape fibres, maybe? This early stage of textile production would have been incredibly labour-intensive. Before you even get to weaving, you have to find the right plants, process the fibres, dry them, maybe treat them in some way. Imagine spending hours stripping tough leaves with a shell or bone tool, getting blisters, dealing with sticky sap, all just to get a small bundle of usable thread. It makes you appreciate that t-shirt a little more, doesn't it? It wasn't a quick trip to the fabric store. It was a deep connection to the land, a mastery of specific plant knowledge, and a whole lot of patience. It was a craft passed down through generations, likely within families or specific community groups. You weren't just learning a skill, you were inheriting a legacy woven into the fabric of your community. So you're there, surrounded by lush green, feeling the heat and the humidity, and you're thinking, okay, I need some threads. Where do you even begin? Well, certainly not with sheep. The raw materials weren't conveniently packaged little balls of fluff. Instead, the ancient textile artisans were botanists, engineers, and alchemists all rolled into one, working with the incredibly diverse plant life around them. Forget your familiar cotton fields. This was a world of fibres extracted from leaves, stems, and bark. The most iconic of these plant powerhouses is probably abaca, often incorrectly called Manila hemp. It's not true hemp, it's related to the banana plant, Musa textilis. If you've ever felt abaca, you know it's strong. Seriously, it's like the superhero of natural fibres. It's tough, durable, and surprisingly resistant to saltwater damage, which, living on islands, is a pretty handy feature. Getting the fibre from the abaca plant is a whole process. You take the stalks, which are actually leaf sheaths, and you have to strip them. Imagine peeling apart thick, layered stalks, then scraping away the pulpy green stuff to reveal the fine, strong fibres underneath. Traditionally, this was often done with a sharp tool, maybe a knife or a piece of shell, sometimes drawn through a vice-like contraption made of wood. It's incredibly physical work, requiring strength and skill to get long, clean strands without breaking them. You'd likely smell the fresh, slightly grassy scent of the plant as you worked, maybe the sticky residue getting on your hands. Another star fibre, particularly in later periods but likely with ancient roots in using related plants, is piña from pineapple leaves. Yes, the stuff your piña colada comes from, but don't go trying to weave with the leaves from your supermarket pineapple. The specific variety and processing are key. Piña fibre is incredibly fine, translucent, and surprisingly strong, giving fabrics a beautiful, delicate look and feel. The process for piña is even more painstaking than abaca. You scrape the fibers from the long pineapple leaves, then wash them, dry them, and most mind-bogglingly, you have to knot individual fibers together to make a continuous thread long enough to weave with. Imagine sitting there, maybe by the water, feeling the cool breeze, painstakingly tying tiny, almost invisible knots. It sounds like a recipe for carpal tunnel syndrome, but it resulted in some of the most exquisite fabrics. This level of patience and dedication speaks volumes about the value placed on these textiles. Beyond abaca and piña, ancient communities would have utilized a range of other local plants depending on their specific island and environment. There's ramier, another strong plant fiber used in weaving. There are various barks that could be beaten into cloth, a technique also found in other parts of Southeast Asia and Oceania. Different grasses and reeds were used for mats and baskets, skills closely related to weaving. Each plant had its own properties, its own strengths and weaknesses, and required specific processing techniques. It was like having a whole natural hardware store and fabric shop right outside your door, but you had to do all the manufacturing yourself. A mainstream historical fact, nemo here, is that the technology for processing fibers from plants like abaca and creating looms existed in Southeast Asia long before European contact. Archaeological finds and comparative linguistic studies tracing the spread of words related to weaving and specific fibers across the Austronesian-speaking world confirm this. The skills were indigenous, refined over centuries through generations of practice and passed down orally and through hands-on teaching. It wasn't something introduced from outside. It was a fundamental part of the material culture that developed within the archipelago. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some accounts mention the use of banana fiber other than abaca for weaving, or even fibers from maguey agave. While abaca is the rock star, it's easy to imagine ancient weavers experimenting with any fibrous plant they could find, testing its strength, flexibility, and how well it took dye. You picture someone pulling apart a random leaf stalk just to see if it might work. It's a kind of ancient bioexploration, trial and error guided by generations of accumulated plant knowledge. Did they have fiber fails? Probably. Did some experiments result in spectacularly itchy or easily broken fabric? Almost certainly. It highlights the ingenuity and deep connection these people had with their environment, squeezing every bit of potential out of the natural world around them. The processing wasn't just about getting clean fibers, it often involved preparing them for dyeing. Ancient dyes weren't store-bought bottles of colour. They came from the same environment: roots, bark, leaves, fruits, even insects or minerals. Achieving vibrant colours required knowing which plants gave which shades, when to harvest them, how to extract the pigment, and how to fix it to the fibre so it wouldn't just wash out. This was another layer of botanical and chemical knowledge passed down through families. Imagine the smell of boiling plant matter, the rich, earthy aroma filling the air as you tried to coax a deep red from a root or a brilliant yellow from bark. It's slow, organic chemistry, with results that could be stunningly beautiful, but probably a little inconsistent compared to modern synthetic dyes. Historians still argue whether the sophisticated processing techniques for fibers like abaca or the intricate knotting required for piña were developed purely independently within the islands, or if there was some early exchange of knowledge with neighbouring regions in Southeast Asia where similar fibrous plants and weaving traditions existed. While the specific types of plants used might be unique to the archipelago, the fundamental principles of fibre extraction and preparation show similarities across the wider region. Was it parallel invention driven by similar environmental challenges, or a shared ancient technological base that diverged over time? It's another thread in the complex tapestry of migration and cultural exchange that shaped the history of the Philippines. Think about the sheer scale of labour involved in producing even a single garment. Finding the plants, harvesting them sustainably, processing the fibres strand by strand, knotting them into thread, preparing the dyes, and then finally the weaving itself. A single piece of significant textile wasn't a quick project, it was weeks, maybe months of work by multiple hands. It wasn't just a product, it was an investment of time, skill, and community effort. This inherent value is why these textiles held such importance, far beyond mere clothing. They embodied the labour, the land, and the knowledge of the people who created them. It makes you look at a simple woven mat or a piece of ancient cloth with a new sense of awe and respect for the hands that made it possible, using nothing but what the earth provided and their own incredible skill. So you've got your fences painstakingly scraped and cleaned from the plant stalks or leaves, laid out drying in the sun. Maybe you have piles of gleaming white abaca strands, tough and ready, or perhaps bundles of the almost translucent piña fibers, delicate enough to make you hold your breath. But these are just individual strands, not yet thread. To make fabric, you need yarn, a continuous length strong enough to withstand the tension of weaving. This is where the magic of spinning comes in. Spinning is the process of twisting these fibers together to create a cohesive thread. Think of it like making a rope, but on a miniature scale, often working with strands finer than human hair. In ancient times, this was primarily done by hand, often using simple tools. You might imagine a spindle whorl, a small weight, maybe made of clay, stone, or wood, attached to a stick. You'd attach a bit of fibre to the stick, give the spindle a spin, and then carefully feed more fibres onto the nascent thread as it twisted, controlling the thickness and tension with your fingers. It's a hypnotic process, a constant motion of drafting the fibres, pulling them out from the bundle, and letting the twist from the spinning spindle bind them together. You'd likely be sitting or standing as you did this, the spindle dangling and twirling maybe by a window for light, or outside in the shade of a tree feeling the gentle breeze. The rhythmic whirring of the spindle could become a soothing backdrop to your thoughts, a quiet counterpoint to the chirping insects and rustling leaves. Different fibres required different techniques and levels of twist. Abaca, being strong, might need less twist than the fine, slippery piña, which, remember, often involved knotting those tiny individual strands together before you even started twisting them into a yarn. Imagine the focus required. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a unicycle. It takes practice and a really steady hand. Once you had your thread, you needed colour. The world wasn't just shades of off-white and beige. Ancient Filipinos adorned their textiles with vibrant colours, and these came entirely from the natural world around them. Forget chemical vats and standardised colour palettes. This was wild, unpredictable, and deeply connected to the seasons and the forest. Dye sources were incredibly varied. You might gather leaves from indigo plants for blues, which, when fermented and processed correctly, could yield beautiful deep indigos. Bark from certain trees, like the sapan or Brazil wood, could give you reds or purples. Roots offered earthy tones, while fruits and seeds might provide yellows or blacks. Imagine wandering through the forest with a basket, not looking for food necessarily, but for that specific leaf or root that gives you the perfect shade of ochre or a rich forest green. It's a treasure hunt for colour. Extracting the dye required its own set of skills. Often it involved boiling plant material in water. You'd see simmering pots over open fires, the air thick with the smell of boiling leaves or bark, maybe a little acrid or earthy depending on the source. Getting the colour to actually stick to the fibres permanently was another challenge. This required mordants, substances that help the dye bind to the fibre. Ancient mordants could be surprising things, maybe certain types of ash, or mineral-rich mud, or even urine. Yes, you heard that right. Ammonia in stale urine could act as a fixative for certain dyes. So while you're admiring that beautiful ancient textile, just remember, its vibrant colour might owe a little something to, shall we say, organic chemistry. It's one of those quirky historical tidbits that makes you appreciate the ingenuity and perhaps the smell tolerance of past generations. Probably not something you'd brag about at a modern craft fair. Yes, this lovely red was fixed using traditional techniques, involving aged bodily fluids. The process of dyeing could be tricky. Temperature, timing, the pH of the water, the ratio of plant material to fibre, all these variables affected the final colour. Achieving consistency was a constant challenge. Two batches using the same plant might turn out slightly different shades depending on when the plant was harvested, or subtle variations in the process. This meant that, even within a single piece of fabric, there might be subtle shifts in colour, adding to its unique handmade character. A mainstream historical fact here is that advanced dyeing techniques, including the use of mordants and knowledge of specific colour-yielding plants, were well established in the Philippines and the wider Southeast Asian region long before significant external influence. The ability to produce colour-fast, vibrant dyes from local sources was a complex technology, not simply a matter of dipping cloth in coloured water. It required accumulated knowledge and skilled execution, indicating sophisticated understanding of natural chemistry. Dyeing wasn't just about colour, it could also be part of the pattern-making process. Techniques like ikat, where threads are resist-dyed before weaving, were practiced in the archipelago. Imagine wrapping bundles of thread tightly with leaves or fibres, dipping them in dye, unwrapping them, wrapping other sections, and dipping again in different colours. When you finally weave these threads, the places that were tied off resist the dye, creating blurred, intricate patterns that emerge only as the fabric is being constructed. It's like painting with yarn before you even pick up the loom. This technique requires incredible foresight and planning, visualizing the final pattern based on how the threads are dyed in bundles. Historians still argue whether the specific forms and distribution of certain complex dyeing techniques like ikat in the Philippines were a result of independent development within different island groups, or if they represent diffusion and adaptation of techniques from neighbouring islands or even mainland Southeast Asia over long periods of trade and migration. The similarities are striking, but the local variations are also significant. Did different communities invent similar methods, or did they learn from each other and put their own unique twist on it? The combination of skilled spinning and sophisticated dyeing transformed raw fibres into the building blocks of textiles. It was labour-intensive, required deep environmental knowledge, and was full of potential pitfalls. Ever had a dye bath go horribly wrong? It's frustrating. But the result was thread that was not only strong and functional, but also imbued with colour and potential pattern, ready for the next stage of its transformation, the weaving itself. This process, from plant to coloured thread, was a testament to the ingenuity and patience of the ancient textile makers, turning the bounty of their islands into something beautiful and useful. So you've done the hard work. You've gathered your fibres, painstakingly processed them, spun them into thread, and perhaps dipped them into simmering pots of natural dyes, coaxing vibrant colours from leaves and bark. You have piles of beautiful, strong, perhaps brilliantly coloured yarn ready to be transformed. This is where the real magic happens, where individual strands are interlaced to create a whole new entity, new fabric. This is the world of weaving, and for millennia in the Philippines, this world often centered around a deceptively simple, yet incredibly sophisticated tool, the backstrap loom. Imagine yourself sitting on the ground, perhaps on a cool bamboo mat in the shade of your house or a large tree. Before you stretches a length of the parallel threads running away from you. These are your warp threads, the foundation of your fabric. They are anchored at one end to something stable, a post, a tree trunk, maybe even looped around your own feet for very short pieces, though usually something fixed further away. The other end of this warp is attached to a bar, and from this bar extends a strap that goes around your lower back. Yes, your back. This is the backstrap part, and it means your own body weight and posture are essential to keeping the warp threads taut. You lean back slightly, creating tension. Lean forward, the tension slackens. You learn to feel the right amount of strain, a balance between too loose, threads get messy, weaving is uneven, and too tight, you get a serious backache and might snap threads. It's an intimate connection to your work. Your physical comfort directly impacts the quality of the textile. It's like your loom is literally connected to your core. Forget ergonomic chairs, this is ancient human engineering, and yes, your lower back will feel it after a while. Think of it as the original core workout, with a beautiful textile as your reward instead of defined abs. Now looking at the warp threads stretched out before you, you see a few key tools in action. There's the heddle, a stick with loops or cords attached to specific warp threads. When you lift this stick, it raises half of your warp threads, creating an opening called the shed. Below that, you might have another stick or bar that helps separate the other half of the threads, creating a different shed when you manipulate it. And then there's the weft. This is the thread that will be woven across the warp. You'll have this thread wound onto a shuttle, a smooth piece of wood designed to pass easily through the shed. With one hand, you lift the heddle, creating the first shed. With the other, you quickly pass the shuttle holding the weft thread through this opening, from one side of the warp to the other. Once the weft thread is across, you release the heddle, and the lifted warp threads fall back into the place, trapping the weft. But that single weft thread is just lying loosely there. You need to push it down firmly against the row woven before it. This is the job of the batten or beater, a flat, often heavy piece of wood or bamboo with a beveled edge. You use this to beat the weft thread down, compacting the weave, making the fabric tight and strong. Beat, 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 and it's a rhythmic sound, the thud of the batten against the threads, joining the gentle scraping of the heddle and the soft rustle of fibres. This repetitive action, lifting the heddle, passing the shuttle, beating the weft, forms the core of the weaving process. Pick, pass, beat. Pick, pass, beat, over and over, building the fabric inch by careful inch. And for a basic plain weave, you alternate which set of warp threads you lift with each pass of the weft. First one set, odd threads, then the other, even threads. The weft goes over one warp thread, under the next, over, under, creating a simple, sturdy interlace. This fundamental technique is found in textiles across the globe, but mastery lies in maintaining consistent tension and beating evenly so the fabric is uniform. Creating patterns is where things get more complex and exciting. Simple patterns like stripes or checks are achieved by using different coloured threads in the warp for vertical stripes, or the weft for horizontal stripes, or both for checks. If you are using those beautifully pre-dyed ikat threads from the last stage, the pattern starts to emerge as you weave. Remember how those threads were tied off to resist dye. As you weave them in, those resist areas line up, creating blurred, intricate designs, diamonds, geometric shapes, perhaps stylized figures. It's like a magical picture slowly appearing from the threads as you work. You knew the design was there on the thread, but seeing it coalesce into a coherent pattern on the fabric, that's a special kind of satisfaction. While the backstrap loom was widespread and incredibly versatile, different communities might have used variations or even slightly more complex types depending on tradition, the type of fibre, or the desired textile. For instance, some might have used body tension only, while others might incorporate a simple frame structure in addition to the backstrap. The essential principle, however, creating a shed and passing the weft, remained the same. A mainstream historical fact is that weaving on backstrap looms, requiring immense skill, patience, and physical exertion, was a central practice for many indigenous communities in the Philippines for thousands of years, predating colonial contact. Textiles produced on these looms were not merely clothing. They were carriers of cultural identity, social status, and spiritual significance. This wasn't just a craft, it was a fundamental pillar of society. The work was often communal, especially the preparatory stages like spinning or setting up the warp. Weaving itself could be a solitary act of meditation or done alongside others, the rhythmic beating of battens creating a unique soundtrack. You might be chatting with your mother, your sister, or an aunt as you worked, sharing stories, gossip, or teaching the younger generation. The knowledge of weaving, the specific patterns, the techniques for different fibres, this was precious knowledge, passed down through generations, often from mother to daughter. It was a skill that connected you to your ancestors and to your community. There's a quirky tidbit about weaving in some cultures, the belief in protective spirits or rituals associated with the loom itself. Sometimes weavers would offer prayers or make small offerings before starting a significant piece, believing that spiritual forces could influence the outcome. A tangled warp, a broken thread, or even a flawed pattern could be seen as a sign of displeasure. Conversely, a beautifully finished piece might be seen as a blessing. Imagine having to appease the loom spirits alongside worrying about your back tension. It adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate process. Historians still argue whether the complex geometric patterns and design motifs found in textiles from different Philippine indigenous groups developed completely independently over time, or if there was significant cultural exchange and influence through inter-island trade networks or migration waves. Some patterns show surprising similarities across disparate groups, while others are fiercely unique to a single community, leading to fascinating debates about the origins and evolution of specific textile traditions. Was that spiral motif invented 5 times, or did it slowly travel across the islands? As you sit there, the weft building up against the batten, the fabric growing longer, you start to see the final piece taking shape. The colours from your dye pots interlace with the plain threads, the patterns you planned or that were embedded in your ikat emerge. It's a slow process, requiring intense focus and physical endurance, but there's a deep satisfaction in watching the raw materials you prepared transform under your hands into a strong, beautiful, and meaningful piece of cloth. The loom isn't just a tool, it's an extension of yourself, connecting you to the fibre, the pattern, and the long line of weavers who came before you. So the fabric is growing row by meticulous row under your hands. You've moved from the raw materials to the fundamental structure, the basic grid of warp and weft. But as you continue the rhythm of pick, pass, beat, something else is happening, something deeper than just creating a piece of cloth. The colours, the texture, the way the threads are interlaced. It's all coming together to form patterns. And these patterns, in ancient Filipino textiles, weren't just about looking pretty. Oh no, they were speaking. Imagine holding a piece of cloth just finished on a backstrap loom. It feels substantial, maybe a little rough depending on the fibre, but dense and strong from the beating. And you look closely at the surface. You might see repeating diamonds, sharp zigzags, swirling lines, or shapes that vaguely resemble animals or human figures. These aren't random designs. They are the visual language of the textile, a code understood by those who knew how to read it. Decoding these patterns is like trying to read an ancient text written not in ink, but in thread. And just like deciphering hieroglyphs or ancient scripts, it takes knowledge, context, and sometimes a bit of educated guesswork. These motifs carried meanings related to nature, spirituality, social status, history, and identity. Your blanket wasn't just a blanket, it was a statement. Your skirt wasn't just a skirt, it was a story. Consider the geometric patterns first, because they are perhaps the most fundamental and widespread. Zigzags, for example, are incredibly common. What could they represent? Think about the landscape around you. Mountains rising and falling, the choppy surface of the sea, the path of a river. Zigzags could symbolize these powerful natural forces, connecting the wearer to the land and water that sustained them. A pattern of stacked triangles might evoke mountain peaks, representing strength and stability. Diamonds are another frequent motif. These are often associated with femininity, fertility, or protection. A diamond shape can look a bit like an eye, watching over you, or like a stylized human torso, linking it to the body and its life-giving power. Weaving a diamond pattern into a textile could be an act of protection, a blessing for the wearer's well-being or fruitfulness. Then there are the swirling lines and spirals. These could represent the flow of water, the wind, or the passage of time and life cycles. They suggest movement and change, connecting the textile to the dynamic forces of the world. Straight lines, whether horizontal or vertical, might simply represent the structure of the world or a clear path, or perhaps boundaries. Combining these simple geometric shapes creates more complex designs like interconnected diamonds forming a lattice, or zigzags layered with stripes, each combination potentially adding layers of meaning. Moving beyond geometry, you might encounter patterns that are inspired more directly by the natural world. Leaves, flowers, birds, monarchs, crocodiles. These are often stylized, not exact replicas, but recognizable forms. A bird motif might represent freedom, the sky, or act as a messenger to the spirit world. A snake or crocodile could symbolize power, danger, or ancestral spirits associated with those creatures. Weaving these into cloth wasn't just decorative, it was invoking their power or acknowledging their significance in the community's worldview. You're not just wearing a shirt, you're wearing a conversation with the local wildlife and potentially their spiritual counterparts. Try explaining that to a modern fashion blogger. And then there are the anthropomorphic patterns, designs that resemble human figures or parts of the human body. These are perhaps the most potent, directly linking the textile to humanity itself, to ancestors, or even to deities. Sometimes these are simple stick figures, other times more complex, showing figures engaged in activities like dancing or holding objects. These could depict historical events, mythical narratives, or represent ancestral spirits watching over the living. Wearing a textile with ancestral figures woven into it was a way of carrying your history, your lineage, on your very body. It's like wearing your family tree, but way more fashionable and significantly harder to update. The placement and combination of these motifs were also significant. Certain patterns might be reserved for specific parts of a garment, along the hem of a skirt, across the chest of a shirt, or on the border of a blanket. The size, colour, and density of the patterns could also add meaning, perhaps indicating the age, gender, or social status of the wearer. A chief or a powerful warrior might wear textiles with bold, complex patterns featuring powerful animals, while everyday wear might have simpler geometric designs. A mainstream historical fact regarding these patterns is their role in signifying social hierarchy and group identity. In many indigenous Filipino societies, the textile one wore immediately communicated crucial information about their status, clan affiliation, and sometimes even their marital status or achievements, like taking heads in battle, though we'll tread lightly on that. The ability to produce or acquire textiles with complex and prestigious patterns was a mark of wealth, skill, and influence. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of designer labels, but with spiritual depth and zero sweatshops mostly. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in certain patterns acting as talismans or protective charms. Some communities believed that specific motifs woven into clothing could ward off evil spirits, protect the wearer from harm, or bring good fortune. The crocodile motif, for instance, while symbolizing danger, could also be seen as a powerful protector capable of warding off other threats. So that zigzag pattern, wasn't just a zigzag. It might have been your personal spiritual bodyguard against bad vibes. Historians still argue whether the precise meanings of all these ancient motifs can ever be fully recovered, especially for groups where oral traditions have been disrupted or where specific pattern meanings were esoteric knowledge held only by weavers or community elders. While general themes are clear, nature, status, spirit, the exact interpretation of every line and shape can be frustratingly elusive, leaving room for ongoing research and debate. Did that particular diamond always mean fertility, or did it sometimes just mean this weaver really likes diamonds? We may never know definitively for every single thread. As you weave, you're not just creating a material object, you're participating in this ancient conversation. You're selecting threads not just for their colour, but for the stories they will tell, the meanings they will carry. You are deciding whether to weave a mountain or a river, a bird or a snake, a protector or a blessing. The loom becomes not just a tool for making fabric, but a canvas for painting the cultural and spiritual landscape of your world, thread by painstaking thread. So you've woven these patterns, these visual whispers, into the very structure of the cloth. But a pattern in undyed fibre, beautiful as it can be, is only part of the story. To truly make it sing, to give it power and presence, you need colour. Colour adds another dimension, another layer of meaning, turning a monochrome message into a vibrant declaration. Think about the world around you in these ancient times. It's bursting with colour. The deep green of the jungle, the rich brown of the earth, the vivid red of certain flowers, the deep blue of the sky and sea, the bright yellow of ripe fruit or sunlight. The people who created these textiles didn't have a catalogue of synthetic dyes from, well, wherever synthetic dyes come from. Their palette came directly from their environment. And extracting these colours was an art and a science in itself, often requiring significant knowledge and labour. You venture out, perhaps with others from your community, into the forest or along the riverbanks, searching for the right plants. You might be looking for the bark of a specific tree to get a deep brown or black. Maybe you're gathering leaves that will yield shades of green or yellow. Roots could provide earthy tones or vibrant reds. There were even dyes derived from animals, like the deep red or purple from certain shellfish, though that might be less common in every region. And while you're gathering, you're probably thinking about the spirits of the forest, offering a small prayer or asking permission before taking from the earth, because everything is connected, right? It's not just grabbing some leaves, it's participating in an ecosystem, a spiritual contract. Trying to explain sustainable foraging to someone whose shopping cart is full of fast fashion polyblends? Good luck. Once you have your materials, the process begins. You might pound the bark, grind the roots, or boil the leaves. These raw plant materials are steeped in water, often over a fire, releasing their coloured essence. It smells earthy, probably smoky too, and possibly a little bitter, depending on what you're boiling. It's not exactly a Yankee Candle kind of fragrance, but simply soaking the fibre in coloured water isn't enough for most dyes to stick permanently. That's where mordants come in. These are substances that help the dye bind to the fibre, making the colour fast, meaning it won't easily wash out. Think of them like the glue that holds the paint to the canvas. Common mordants in ancient times were often natural substances like alum, a mineral, ashes from certain plants which contain alkali, or even specific types of clay. The right mordant could dramatically change the final colour or intensity you got from a particular plant. Get it wrong, and you might end up with a muddy mess instead of a vibrant hue, which is the ancient textile equivalent of accidentally shrinking your favourite sweater in the wash. Devastating. You carefully prepare your yarn or woven cloth, soaking it, maybe treating it with a mordant bath, and then immersing it in the simmering pot of dye. You watch as the fibres slowly absorb the colour, the water gradually losing its intensity as the pigment transfers to the threads. It takes patience, temperature control, and knowing just how long to leave it in. Too short, and the colour is weak. Too long, and it might become too dark or even damage the fibre. It's a delicate dance between the plant, the fibre, the mordant, and the heat. Now, what about the colours themselves? Just like the patterns, each colour carried weight and meaning. Red, for instance, was, and still is in many cultures, a hugely significant colour. It's the colour of blood, of life, of courage, of war, and often of prestige and power. Weaving with red threads wasn't just adding brightness, it was invoking these potent concepts. A warrior might wear red to show bravery. A textile with extensive red could be reserved for special ceremonies or high-status individuals. Black could represent the earth, the ancestors, mourning, or even protection, as it could symbolize the darkness that wards off evil. Sometimes black dyes were achieved by burying fibers in mud rich in iron, which would react with plant tannins. Yellow, often derived from turmeric or other plants, could symbolize prosperity, harvest, or sunlight. Green, though perhaps harder to achieve a lasting green with natural dyes, represented nature, fertility, and growth. White, the natural color of many fibers before dyeing, often symbolized purity, spirituality, or peace. And brown, the color of the earth and bark, grounded the textile in the physical world. A mainstream historical fact is that the difficulty and rarity of obtaining certain vibrant colors, like strong reds or deep blacks, directly contributed to their value and symbolic importance. Dyes that required complex extraction processes or materials only found in specific locations became indicators of wealth, access to resources, or extensive trade networks. Think of it like finding a naturally occurring sparkle on your fabric. It was a big deal. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the use of fermentation in some dyeing processes, particularly for indigo, though perhaps less widespread or documented in ancient Philippines compared to Southeast Asian neighbours. The principle applies to some plant dyes. Some dye baths had to ferment for days or even weeks, developing specific bacteria that helped set the colour. Imagine your dye pot bubbling away, smelling a little funky, and knowing that tiny microbes were doing the work of colouring your fabric. It's like making sourdough, but for textiles. Historians still argue whether the specific shade or intensity of a colour held nuanced meanings within a single community or across different groups. While broad symbolic meanings for colours like red and black are often consistent, did a very deep red mean something slightly different from a lighter shade? Was bright yellow always positive, or could it signify something else in a ritual context? Without written records detailing these nuances, understanding the full spectrum of colour symbolism can be challenging. As the cloth dries after its dye bath, the colours deepen and reveal their true richness. These colours aren't just pigment, they are the distilled essence of the natural world, imbued with symbolic power by generations of tradition. The patterns tell the story, and the colours add the emotion, the emphasis, the spiritual weight. Your woven piece, now vibrant with life and meaning, is ready for the next step in its transformation from simple fibre to a potent piece of cultural heritage. So you've coaxed the colour from the earth, the roots, the leaves, perhaps even creatures of the sea, binding it to your fibres with patient heat and ancient knowledge. Your cloth is now vibrant, alive with the symbolic power of its patterns and the emotional resonance of its hues. But this textile, this meticulously crafted piece of woven story, isn't just destined to be everyday wear or something you casually drape over a chair. Oh no. For many, its ultimate purpose lies in the sarid, in the moments where the veil between the ordinary world and the spiritual realm feels thinnest. This is where the soft power of the textile truly shines. Imagine a significant event is approaching in your community. Maybe it's a coming-of-age ceremony for the young people marking their transition into adulthood and responsibility. Perhaps it's a healing ritual for someone afflicted with a mysterious illness, a moment when the community pools its spiritual energy to restore balance. Or maybe it's a pact being sealed between two families, or even two different groups, a moment of alliance where promises are made and witnessed by the ancestors and spirits. In all these vital instances, textiles aren't mere decoration, they are active participants. They are conduits, symbols, and sometimes even characters in the unfolding drama. You might see a babaylan, a spiritual leader or shaman, preparing for a healing ritual. They don a specific woven wrap or headpiece, one imbued with patterns believed to attract benevolent spirits and ward off malevolent ones. The colours aren't random, they are chosen for their protective qualities or their connection to specific deities or natural forces. As they perform the ritual, chanting and moving, the textile becomes an extension of their power, a visual and tactile representation of their connection to the unseen world. The cloth might be placed directly on the afflicted person, its patterns and fibres believed to absorb the sickness or infuse the patient with healing energy. It's not unlike someone giving you their lucky scarf before a big exam, multiplied by 1,000 years of accumulated belief and potent symbolism. In a wedding ceremony, the exchange of textiles could be as significant as the exchange of vows today. Families might present elaborately woven cloths to each other, symbolizing the intertwining of their lineages and fortunes. The garments worn by the bride and groom wouldn't just be fancy outfits, they would be loaded with protective symbols, wishes for fertility, prosperity, and harmony woven directly into the threads. Wearing such a textile wasn't just putting on clothes, It was stepping into a sacred identity for that moment, wrapped in the blessings of the community and the ancestors. You wouldn't want to trip over your hem. Imagine the bad omen. Births and deaths were also marked by textiles. A newborn might be wrapped in a specially prepared cloth, perhaps with patterns meant to protect them from harm and guide them safely into this life. When a person passed away, they might be wrapped in a shroud woven specifically for that purpose, often featuring designs meant to assist their journey to the afterlife or honour their status in life. These burial cloths weren't just practical coverings, they were the final, profound textile message sent with the departed, a last embrace woven with love and respect. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread use of textiles as markers of social status and identity, which became particularly visible during communal gatherings and rituals. Wearing certain patterns, using specific colours, or possessing textiles made from rare materials wasn't just about looking good, it was a declaration of your lineage, your achievements, your role within the community, and your access to resources and power. In a society without written titles or formal hierarchies in this way we might recognise them, your cloth often spoke volumes about who you were. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the belief in some cultures that certain powerful textiles, particularly those used in healing or warfare, could become charged with spiritual energy or even develop a sort of life of their own over time, requiring specific care or rituals to maintain their potency. It's like your favourite worn-out t-shirt having sentimental value, but cranked up to 11, where its value is spiritual and potentially volatile. You wouldn't just throw it in the wash with your other whites, you might have to appease it with offerings. Historians still argue whether the precise interpretation of ritual textiles was universally understood across different language groups and communities within the archipelago, or if meanings were highly localized and potentially changed over time. While core concepts might have been shared, did a certain zigzag pattern mean exactly the same thing in a Visayan burial ritual as it did in a Luzon wedding ceremony? Without detailed ethno-historical accounts for every group and period, nailing down specific interpretations can be challenging. The textile in these rituals wasn't just passive material, it was handled with reverence, sometimes displayed prominently, unfurled to reveal its full glory, or worn in specific ways that amplified its symbolic message. The rustle of the fabric, the way it caught the light, the feel of its texture, all contributed to the sensory experience of the ritual, grounding the spiritual in the physical world. These were multi-sensory events, and the textiles were central to creating that environment. So the cloth you help bring to life, from fibre to finished dye bath, finds its place in the most profound moments of human existence. It is a shield against unseen forces, a bridge between worlds, a declaration of identity, a vessel for blessing, and a final comfort. It carries the weight of tradition and the hopes of the living, demonstrating that even the softest material can possess immense power when woven with intention and meaning. So you've seen how this woven magic wraps around the most significant moments of life and death, acting as a bridge to the spiritual and a declaration of identity within your community. But the power of these textiles, this soft power we're exploring, wasn't confined by the borders of your village or even your island. Oh no. It flowed outwards, across rivers, over mountains, and sailing the seas, becoming a vital language of connection, trade, and even diplomacy in the wider world. Imagine you're at a bustling coastal market. The air hums with different languages, the smells of drying fish mingle with exotic spices, and merchants from distant shores haggle over goods. And there, amidst the pottery, metal tools, and food staples, are textiles. Piles of them, rolls of vibrant cloth, intricately patterned weaves, finished garments, even bundles of raw or dyed fibres. These weren't just casual items, they were high-value commodities, sought after as much as gold or pearls in some exchanges. Your community's distinct patterns, the unique colours you achieve with your local dyes, the particular feel of your fibres, these become your brand. You develop a reputation for quality or for a specific style of weaving. Merchants from far away might specifically ask for cloth from your region, knowing its value. It's like stumbling upon a vintage designer piece today. That specific label, that particular era carries an intrinsic worth beyond the material itself. Textiles could function almost like a form of currency. While not a standardized medium of exchange like coins would become later, certain types of cloth were so widely accepted and desired that they could be traded for almost anything. You might exchange a roll of finely woven Abeka cloth for a set of iron tools, or a bundle of vividly dyed cotton for bags of rice or spices. Think of it as bartering, but with fabric as the high-ticket item. It beats trying to carry a cow across the ocean, that's for sure. But it wasn't just about the practical exchange of goods. Textiles were potent instruments of diplomacy. When a chieftain needed to forge an alliance with a neighbouring group, or when a potential conflict needed to be smoothed over, a gift of significant textiles was often part of the process. Imagine two leaders meeting. Instead of exchanging signed documents, which, let's be honest, were less common back then, they might present each other with exquisite woven cloths. These weren't just friendly gestures, they were deeply symbolic acts. The quality of the textile, its pattern, its colour, the effort clearly invested in its creation, all spoke volumes about the sender's respect, wealth, and sincerity. Receiving such a gift wasn't just a material gain, it was an acceptance of the proposed relationship, be it alliance, peace, or trade partnership. The textile became a tangible reminder of that agreement, a soft contract woven in thread. It's like getting a fancy corporate gift today, but instead of a pen with a logo, it's a handmade masterpiece carrying the weight of a political treaty. You probably wouldn't leave that on your desk. These textiles also acted as cultural ambassadors. When your cloth travelled to distant lands, it carried with it a piece of your identity, your artistry, and your world view. People seeing your distinctive patterns or feeling the unique texture of your fibre were getting a glimpse into your culture, even if they never set foot on your shores. They might learn something about your symbols, your myths, your artistic sensibilities, simply by handling the cloth. It was a quiet, powerful form of cultural exchange that transcended language barriers. A mainstream historical fact is the extensive maritime trade networks throughout the Southeast Asian archipelago long before significant European contact. Filipino textiles were documented as being traded as far as China, India, and the Middle East, alongside other goods like spices, pottery, and precious metals. These were not isolated communities, they were interconnected participants in a vibrant regional economy. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the practice, documented in some areas, where specific textile patterns or types were reserved for diplomatic gifts only, never used for trade or personal wear, reinforcing their secret or political significance. It was like having a special state visit wardrobe, but woven and much, much older. You didn't wear it to the market, you brought it out when you needed to impress or appease a potentially hostile neighbour. Historians still argue whether the trade in textiles was primarily driven by the aesthetic appeal and perceived quality of the fabrics or by the symbolic and spiritual power attributed to certain weaves and patterns from different regions. Was a foreign merchant buying your cloth because it looked pretty, or because they believed its patterns brought good fortune or protection? It was likely a mix, but the precise emphasis remains debated. Think about a ship arriving from a distant island. The captain might bring not just goods for trade, but also special woven cloths as tribute or gifts for the local leader. These textiles would be examined not just for their monetary value, but for their quality, their origin, and the messages they potentially carried in their weave. Was the gift generous? Were the patterns familiar or exotic? Did they signal respect or perhaps a subtle challenge? The soft power of these textiles wasn't just about their ability to comfort or adorn, it was their ability to connect, to negotiate, to impress, and to communicate across distances. They were the threads that helped weave together the diverse peoples and cultures of the archipelago, demonstrating that beauty and meaning could be powerful tools in the complex dance of human interaction. So these textiles weren't just travelling the trade routes and smoothing over diplomatic squabbles, they were also deeply woven into the fabric of your own society, literally. Inside your village, within your community, the clothes you wore, the mats you sat on, the blankets that warmed you. They weren't just functional items, they were visual cues, loud declarations of who you were, where you fit, and how much respect you commanded. Imagine walking through the heart of your village. You can tell a warrior from a farmer, a village elder from a new adolescent, not just by their bearing or their tools, but by the cloth they wear. Their status is quite literally on display. It's like everyone has a really intricate uniform, but instead of khaki and epaulets, it's woven patterns and fibre types. You wouldn't catch someone wearing the wrong pattern. That would be a social faux pas equivalent to showing up to a royal banquet in flip-flops, and potentially much worse consequences. Certain fibres were inherently more valuable or harder to process and therefore reserved for higher ranks. A baka, that strong, lustrous fibre we talked about, especially when processed into fine threads, was often associated with prestige. Cotton, depending on its quality and the intricacy of the weave, also held varying degrees of value. Silk, when available through trade, was the ultimate luxury, often reserved for the absolute elite, the chieftain, the most powerful shamans, their immediate families. Wearing silk wasn't just comfortable, it was saying without a single word, "I'm kind of a big deal." The complexity of the weave itself was another status indicator. Simple plain weaves might be for everyday wear, sturdy and practical, but intricate supplementary weft patterns, complex ikat designs where the threads were dyed. Before, weaving, or challenging techniques like double ikat, were labours of immense skill and time. Garments made with these techniques were costly, not just in materials but in the human effort required. Only those with wealth could afford to commission or acquire such pieces, and only those with the social standing could appropriately wear them. It's like today you can buy a basic t-shirt easily, but a haute couture gown? That's a different league entirely. Colour also played a crucial role. Dyes derived from rare plants or complex processes yielded vibrant, saturated colours that were harder to achieve and thus more valuable. Deep reds, rich indigos, brilliant yellows, these weren't just pretty hues. They were signals of expense and status. Some colours, or combinations of colours, might even be restricted to certain social groups or occasions. Imagine having a VIP section in your wardrobe based purely on the colour of the thread. Specific patterns held immense symbolic weight and were often tied to particular families, clans, or social ranks. A certain motif might represent ancestry, another might signify a successful headhunt. Yes, that happened, but we're focusing on the fabric, remember? Another could be linked to spiritual power or the right to lead. You didn't just choose a pattern because you liked how it looked. You wore the pattern that reflected your lineage, your achievements, and your place in the social order. It was like your family crest, but way more wearable and less prone to being poked with a spear. These textiles acted as a kind of visual language of hierarchy. When you saw someone approaching, a glance at their clothing could instantly tell you a lot about them, their social rank, their family background, perhaps even their role in the community. This wasn't just about looking good, it was about maintaining social order and knowing how to interact with someone. It's like recognizing someone's uniform today: doctor, police officers, a mail carrier. Their clothing immediately signals their role and authority, or lack thereof. For special ceremonies like weddings, funerals, or coming-of-age rituals, the textiles used reached their peak of significance. Brides and grooms wore their finest, most symbolic weaves, declaring the joining of families and their new status. Shroud cloths for the deceased were often intricately patterned, intended to guide or protect the soul in the afterlife, reflecting the person's importance in life. A particularly powerful chieftain might be buried in layers of precious cloths, a final material testament to their earthly power. This elaborate system of textile-based status markers helped reinforce social structures that were often based on lineage, wealth, and prowess, in areas like warfare, farming, or craftsmanship. The right to wear certain items was earned or inherited, and it was a deeply respected aspect of community life. Trying to wear something above your station would not only be seen as arrogant, but could disrupt the perceived balance of the social world. You wouldn't want to trigger that kind of spiritual or social imbalance, would you? Stick to your lane, textile-wise. A mainstream historical fact is that across many indigenous societies in the Philippines, certain textile types, patterns, and colours were traditionally restricted to specific social classes or individuals who had achieved particular feats, like leadership in battle or ritual knowledge. This wasn't just a fashion trend, it was a fundamental aspect of social identity and control. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that in some groups, the act of weaving itself was intertwined with social status, with women of higher rank sometimes expected to produce the most complex and valuable textiles, showcasing their skill and contributing to the family's prestige through their artistry. It wasn't just the wearing that mattered, but the making too. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for the differentiation in textiles was purely social stratification, keeping the classes visually separate, or whether it was deeply rooted in spiritual beliefs and the idea that certain patterns or materials held intrinsic power or connection to the divine that only certain people were permitted to access. Was it about showing off wealth, or about accessing sacred power? Probably a bit of both, but the emphasis is debated. So next time you see a really intricate textile, or even just a simple, beautifully made piece of cloth, take a moment. Remember that for centuries in the Philippines, these threads and patterns weren't just decoration. They were identity cards, status symbols, historical records, and spiritual connectors. silently broadcasting messages about the wearer and their place in the world. Beyond the visual grammar of social standing we just explored, these textiles held an even deeper resonance, humming with spiritual significance and playing a crucial role in the most sacred moments of life and death. They weren't just worn, they were part of the ceremony, woven into the very fabric of belief and ritual. Imagine a shaman preparing for a healing ritual. It's not just about the herbs or the chants, the textiles involved are fundamental. They might wear a specific headcloth adorned with patterns believed to connect them to ancestral spirits, or use a specially woven mat as a sacred space for the ritual itself. The cloth isn't passive, it's an active participant, a conduit for spiritual energy. It's like needing that perfectly worn-in comfort blanket for your movie night, but cranked up to 11, where the comfort is spiritual power. Textiles were used to wrap sacred objects, to delineate holy spaces within the community, or even draped over altars. The patterns themselves weren't just decorative, they were often cosmological maps, depictions of deities, spirit guides, or symbols of balance and harmony. Wearing or using these patterned cloths during a ritual was like accessing a visual prayer book, reminding everyone of the spiritual forces at play. Consider a harvest festival. The earth has been generous, and it's time to give thanks and ensure future bounty. Textiles would be prominent. People might wear special clothes adorned with symbols of fertility or prosperity. Woven baskets, perhaps decorated with specific patterns, would be used to carry offerings. Ceremonial banners or lengths of cloth might be displayed, fluttering in the breeze, carrying messages of gratitude to the spirits of the land. It's a full sensory experience, the rustling of the fabric, the vibrant colours, the scent of offerings, all working together to create a sacred atmosphere. Major life transitions were almost always marked by textiles. You saw how they were used for status in marriages and funerals, but the ritual use goes beyond just showing off. In some traditions, specific cloths were used to wrap a newborn, imbuing them with protection and ancestral blessings right from the start. Think of it as a spiritual swaddle. Coming-of-age ceremonies might involve shedding one type of clothing associated with childhood and donning another, symbolically woven, representing entry into adulthood and new responsibilities. And at the end of life, textiles were profoundly important. Shroud cloths weren't just to cover the body, they were believed to accompany the soul on its journey. Certain patterns might be woven specifically for the deceased, incorporating symbols meant to guide them safely through the spirit world or appease potentially troublesome entities. The care and complexity of the shroud could also reflect the community's respect for the departed, a final act of love and spiritual support. It's a textile send-off, ensuring your eternal wardrobe is up to snuff. The creation of these ritual textiles was often a ritual in itself. The weavers might perform specific prayers or offerings before starting, maintaining a state of purity during the work. The act of weaving, bringing threads together to create pattern and form, could be seen as a metaphor for bringing the community or the spiritual and physical worlds into harmony. The weaver wasn't just a craftsperson. They were a conduit, channeling ancestral knowledge and spiritual intent into the cloth. Textiles were also used in diplomacy and peacemaking. When rival groups met to forge a peace pact, the exchange or shared use of specially woven cloths could symbolize the binding of their communities. A chieftain might present a rival with a precious textile as a sign of good faith and mutual respect, literally weaving a new connection between them. It's a lot more elegant than signing a really long contract, right? A mainstream historical fact is that across the Philippine archipelago, textiles were deeply integrated into indigenous belief systems and formed an essential component of rituals related to healing, protection, and connecting with the spirit world, used by shamans and community members alike. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves dream weaving, particularly among groups like the Taboli of Mindanao. They believe that some of their most intricate and sacred patterns, especially those for the tenalak cloth made from abaca fibre, are revealed to the weavers in their dreams by ancestral spirits, making the act of weaving a direct collaboration with the divine. Historians still argue whether the primary power attributed to ritual textiles came from the inherent properties believed to be in the fibres and dyes themselves, the specific symbolic meanings encoded in the patterns, or the sacred context and intentions surrounding their creation and use in ceremony. Was the magic in the material, the message, or the moment? So when you look at these ancient Filipino textiles, remember, they weren't just things you wore or used. They were living objects imbued with meaning, history, and spirit. They wrapped you at birth, guided you in life's transitions, healed you when you were sick, connected you to the unseen world, and accompanied you on your final journey. They were, and for many communities still are, not just threads and patterns, but threads holding the universe together. So you've seen how these textiles weren't just passive objects. They were woven into the very spiritual lifeblood of communities. But their soft power extended beyond the purely spiritual, reaching deep into the realm of collective memory and historical preservation. In societies where written language might have been limited or non-existent for certain groups, how do you pass down generations of knowledge, stories, laws and history? You weave it. Imagine a vast, intricate tapestry of history, not written on parchment or carved in stone, but threaded through with patterns and symbols passed down through the generations. That's essentially what was happening with some of these ancient Filipino textiles. A specific design wasn't just pretty. It could be a mnemonic device, a visual shorthand for a story, a genealogy, or even a set of customary laws. Wearing or displaying these cloths was like carrying a library on your back or hanging a chronicle on your wall. Think about it. Every motif, every colour, every subtle variation in texture could hold meaning. A zigzag pattern might represent a river journey your ancestors took. A particular arrangement of diamonds could symbolise a successful harvest or a significant battle won. A specific colour dye, maybe hard to obtain or prepared with a special ritual, might signify a royal lineage or a sacred pact. It's like having a QR code woven into your fabric, but instead of linking to a website, it links to hundreds of years of shared memory. You just needed the scanner, the cultural understanding to interpret the pattern language. Without that, it just looks like, well, a nice pattern, which is a bit like losing your phone mid-scan, isn't it? The process of weaving itself was a crucial part of this memory transmission. As a weaver sat at their loom, perhaps with a younger generation watching, they weren't just manipulating threads, they were reciting the stories, explaining the meanings of the patterns as they formed, sharing the history encoded in the cloth. The rhythm of the loom became a kind of heartbeat for communal memory. It was hands-on learning in the truest sense, passing down not just a skill, but an entire cultural heritage, thread by thread, story by story. Specific textiles might function like family trees. Imagine a ceremonial cloth where each segment represents a generation, and the patterns within that segment tell the story of that ancestor, their triumphs, their challenges, their place in the lineage. This wasn't just abstract history, it was personal, tangible, wearable heritage. It's like having your entire family history on a giant quilt, except way cooler and probably less likely to give you dust bunnies. These textiles also served as contracts or markers of agreement. When different communities came together for trade or alliance, the exchange of textiles or the presence of specifically patterned cloths could solidify the agreement. The pattern itself might represent the terms of the pact, or symbolise the intertwined destinies of the groups involved. It was a binding document you could literally wrap yourself in, much harder to lose than a flimsy piece of paper, though perhaps easier to spill something on. A mainstream historical fact is that for many indigenous cultures in the Philippines, lacking extensive written records prior to colonization, textiles served as vital repositories of cultural knowledge, history, myths, and social structures, with specific patterns and techniques functioning as a complex visual language understood within the community. A quirky or fringe tidbit relates to the preservation of specific weave structures or patterns, some of which are incredibly complex and require years of dedicated practice to master. Losing a weaver who knows a particular ancient technique is not just losing a craftsperson, it's like losing an entire volume of a living history book. A unique font or code is gone forever. Historians still argue whether the primary function of pattern complexity was aesthetic expression, a deliberate strategy for knowledge encoding to be read by the initiated, or simply the natural evolution of artistic skill and cultural preference over time. Was it primarily art, information, or just tradition marching forward? So as you drift deeper into comfort, think about these threads, not just as fibres, but as sentences, paragraphs, and chapters in a history book woven into existence. A history you could wear, touch, and pass down through the generations simply by the rhythm of the loom and the sharing of ancient tales. These textiles were the soft-covered chronicles of a vibrant past, so you felt the weight of history in the threads, the whisper of ancestors in the patterns. But these wasn't just internal affairs, were they? These weren't just cosy personal libraries woven for the family. No, these textiles, unassuming as they might seem when tucked away in a dusty museum case, were also like passports and receipts and cultural ambassadors, all rolled into one incredibly soft package. They travelled. And when they travelled, or when influences from other places arrived and showed up in the weaving, they left a trail. A subtle, colourful trail pointing to ancient trade routes and deep connections across seas and lands. Imagine you're an archaeologist centuries from now digging up a site. You find pottery, tools, maybe some old bones, standard stuff. But then you find fragments of fabric, perhaps preserved in a dry cave or in a jar. And these fragments have patterns or use materials that aren't native to this specific island, but are identical to ones found hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away. What does that tell you? It tells you people were moving, trading, interacting. The threads literally link you to distant shores. The presence of certain materials is a big clue. Think silk. Silkworms weren't indigenous to all parts of the Philippines. If you find silk woven into a centuries-old textile on a remote island, it didn't just magically appear, it arrived via trade. Same with certain dyes derived from plants or minerals found elsewhere, or beads used as embellishments originating from entirely different geological zones. The very components of the textile become footnotes in the story of global, or at least regional, exchange networks. It's like finding a coffee cup from Italy in ancient Rome. Okay, maybe not the best analogy, but you get the idea. The stuff wasn't grown there, it came from somewhere else. Beyond materials, shared techniques and motifs also speak volumes. If a complex backstrap weaving method common in Borneo suddenly appears in textiles from Mindanao, it suggests contact, sharing of knowledge, maybe even weavers moving between islands. Or if specific geometric patterns found in textiles from mainland Southeast Asia show up in Philippine weaving traditions, it indicates cultural exchange, adoption, or influence. It's like finding out your great-great-grandmother had a secret recipe for curry because someone visited from India way back when. The recipe, or in this case the pattern or technique, got passed along. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological finds and historical accounts confirm extensive maritime trade networks connected the Philippine archipelago with other parts of Southeast Asia, China, India, and even the Middle East, long before European colonization. And textiles were among the significant goods exchanged, either as finished products or raw materials like silk and cotton. Think about the scale of this. These weren't just isolated bartering sessions, these were established routes, perhaps seasonal, with merchants and sailors navigating by stars and currents. The ships would be laden with goods, spices, metals, pottery, and yes, bundles of shimmering fabrics, vibrant cloths, and perhaps even valuable thread or dyes. These textiles weren't just commodities, they were also wrapped around other goods, used as sails or coverings, and worn by the travellers themselves, showcasing the skills and aesthetics of their homeland. They were literally part of the journey. It makes you wonder, did anyone accidentally trade their pants? Oh, sorry, that valuable textile I just gave you, that was my ceremonial kilt. Could I get that back, please? It has my ancestors' battle history woven into it. Probably not a smooth transaction. The influence wasn't just one way, of course. While Filipino weavers adopted techniques and materials from outside, their own unique styles and creations also travelled outward, influencing textile traditions in neighbouring regions. The artistry developed on these islands, with its unique blend of natural fibres, intricate weaves and rich symbolism, became part of the larger textile tapestry of Southeast Asia. It was a two-way street of inspiration and innovation. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the theory that some incredibly complex weave patterns, particularly those used in ceremonial cloths, might have served as a kind of visual manifest or inventory for trade voyages, with specific symbols representing types or quantities of goods being transported, acting as a memory aid for merchants in an era without written records. Imagine your inventory list was woven into your cloak. Historians still argue whether the adoption of foreign textile motifs and techniques was primarily driven by economic factors adapting to market demands, social status displaying exotic imports, or genuine cultural exchange and artistic appreciation among different groups. Was it about making money, showing off, or just thinking, hey, that's a cool pattern, I'm going to try that? So these ancient Filipino textiles, seemingly rooted in local tradition and nature, were also windows onto a much wider world. They carried the scent of distant markets, the echoes of foreign languages, and the visual grammar of cultures interacting across watery highways. As you settle deeper, think of the global journey hidden within these threads, connecting islands and continents in a silent, colourful dialogue. So you've traced the threads across ancient seas, felt the whisper of distant lands in the fabric itself. These textiles weren't just passive passengers on trade ships, They were active participants in a cultural conversation, carrying echoes of other places back to the islands. And the weavers, the incredible artists we've been imagining, they didn't just look at these foreign textiles and say, "Oh, that's nice." They looked, they learned, and then they created something entirely new. Think about it like being a chef. You have your traditional family recipes, passed down through generations, your abaca fibers, your backstrap looms, your indigenous patterns representing mountains and waves and ancestors. Then someone brings you a bag of exotic spices you've never seen before, or shows you a completely different way to ferment something, or introduces a new type of noodle. You don't just abandon your traditions, you experiment. You might add a pinch of that new spice to your familiar stew, or try twisting your usual dough into that new noodle shape, perhaps even incorporating a foreign cooking technique with your local ingredients. That's what happened with these textiles. The most obvious influence came from regions they traded with regularly. From China, you see the introduction of silk, the glorious smooth fibre that felt utterly different from the rougher abaca or pineapple fibres. While local fibres remained primary for everyday wear and traditional cloths, silk became a status symbol, a luxurious addition, sometimes woven into existing textiles as accents, or used entirely for special garments for the elite. Along with the fibre came techniques for handling it, and potentially certain motifs associated with Chinese art, which were then adapted by Filipino weavers, blending seamlessly, or perhaps jarringly, depending on the artist, with their own symbolic language. From the Indian subcontinent and areas influenced by it, such as parts of Southeast Asia, came complex resist-dyeing techniques like batik. Though often less elaborate than Javanese batik, the principles of creating patterns by preventing dye absorption were understood and applied. And potentially the introduction of certain geometric or even figurative motifs is derived from Indian aesthetics or religious symbolism, subtly reinterpreted through an Austronesian lens. Imagine seeing a complex mandala-like pattern on a foreign cloth and thinking, how can I make that look like our sun motif? Southeast Asian neighbours, particularly maritime groups in Borneo and other islands, had perhaps the most direct and continuous exchange. Weaving techniques, loom types and specific pattern elements flowed back and forth. The shared heritage of Austronesian migration meant there were already underlying similarities in some textile traditions, making the adoption and adaptation even smoother, like distant cousins sharing recipe ideas. It's the textile version of borrowing your neighbour's cool new gardening tool and then building a slightly different, maybe better version yourself. A mainstream historical fact is that contact with Srivijaya and Majapahit empires, powerful thalassocracies centred in Sumatra and Java respectively, significantly influenced the material culture, including textiles, of various groups in the Philippine archipelago through trade and cultural exchange over centuries before the arrival of Europeans. So these foreign influences weren't just slapped onto existing designs, they were integrated, digested and transformed. A Chinese dragon motif might be re-rendered with the sharp angular lines more characteristic of indigenous carving. A complex Indian geometric pattern might be simplified and combined with local ancestor figures or natural forms. New dyes were incorporated, expanding the colour palette beyond the earthy tones derived purely from local plants. This wasn't passive reception, it was active creolization, a dynamic process of mixing and innovation. This blending shows the incredible artistic flexibility and resilience of the local weaving traditions. They could absorb outside ideas without losing their core identity. It's like trying out new slang from another country. You might adopt a few cool words, but you don't suddenly forget your own language or completely change how you speak. The foundation remained, built on centuries of connection to the land, the community, and the spirit world. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the possibility that certain abstract geometric patterns found in some Philippine textiles might have originally represented simplified diagrams of trade routes or maps, adapted from navigators or merchants' notes, and then incorporated into textiles, adding a layer of hidden meaning related to the journeys that brought new influences. Imagine wearing a map to the Spice Islands on your shoulder. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for incorporating foreign elements was purely aesthetic, driven by a desire for novelty and beauty, or if it was deeply tied to the economic value and status associated with imported goods and the perceived prestige of foreign cultures. Was it about making something beautiful, or making something that looked expensive and important? These textiles, then, become incredible documents of global interaction. They show you that the ancient world wasn't isolated. People were connected by threads, both literal ones spun from fibre and metaphorical ones woven through trade and cultural sharing. As you drift further, let the colours and patterns of these textiles paint a picture of islands connected, traditions exchanged, and the endless human capacity for creativity and adaptation, even when faced with the new and the foreign. You felt the texture of foreign threads woven into familiar patterns, seen how distant lands left their mark on the island's looms. But these fabrics weren't just items of personal adornment or trade goods moving silently from hand to hand. They were potent symbols, woven with meaning, and they played a crucial role in the intricate dance of power, prestige, and diplomacy that unfolded between different communities and leaders across the archipelago. Imagine yourself as a Datu, a chieftain in the bustling coastal settlement of Tondo, or perhaps a leader in the highlands of Luzon surrounded by rice terraces and the scent of pine. When a delegation from a neighbouring settlement, maybe even from a distant island, arrives, you don't just shake hands and exchange pleasantries. The exchange of gifts is paramount. And what better gift, what more eloquent symbol of respect and alliance than finely crafted textiles? These weren't just any cloths. These were often the very best your community could produce, showcasing the skill of your weavers, the richness of your resources like rare dyes or especially fine fibres, and your connections to trade networks that might have brought those foreign silk threads we talked about. Giving such a textile was like handing over a piece of your community's soul and saying, "We value this relationship." It was a tangible expression of trust and a promise of future cooperation. Think of it like corporate gifting today, but way more personal and with higher stakes than a fruit basket or a branded pen. If you're a CEO, you might give a fancy watch to seal a big deal. If you're a Datu, you're giving a hand-woven mantle that took months to create and carries symbolic weight that could determine peace or war. No pressure, right? Receiving a textile was equally significant. It meant you were acknowledged, your status recognized. The quality and origin of the textile you received spoke volumes about your relationship with the giver and your own place in the regional hierarchy. Wearing a mantle gifted by a powerful Datu from a wealthy trading port was like wearing a badge of alliance, announcing to everyone, "I have friends in high places literally wearing awesome fabrics." Textiles were also critical in formal agreements, like peace treaties or marriage alliances between noble families. A specific cloth might be commissioned or exchanged as part of the ceremony, its thread symbolically binding the two parties together. The patterns woven into it might represent the merging of lineages, the shared aspirations for prosperity, or a historical event significant to both groups. It's the original tying the knot, perhaps. Beyond inter-community relations, textiles were powerful status symbols within a community. Certain patterns, colours, and types of fibre were reserved for the elite, the datus, their families, and the priestly class. This wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a visual language that reinforced social structure. You could tell a lot about a person's rank and influence just by looking at the cloth they wore. Imagine trying to decipher ancient Filipino society just by people's outfits. It's like trying to understand the modern corporate world based solely on who wears a suit and who wears flip-flops to the office, though in fairness, some tech companies make that just as confusing. A mainstream historical fact illustrating this is the existence of sumptuary laws or unwritten social codes among various groups, where certain patterns, colours like red or yellow or fibres like silk, were restricted to the nobility or individuals who had achieved specific feats, such as success in warfare. Wearing a forbidden pattern wasn't just a fashion faux pas, it was a serious challenge to the social order. These restrictions underscore that textiles weren't just clothing, they were woven documents of social identity and achievement. The more complex the pattern, the finer the weave, the richer the colour, often meant the higher the status of the wearer. Think of the effort involved in creating these pieces, sourcing materials, preparing fibres, natural dyeing, the intricate weaving itself. This labour-intensive process inherently made high-quality textiles valuable. A quirky or fringe tidbit suggests that in some communities, specific textile patterns were believed to possess protective or even magical properties, and wearing the appropriate pattern was crucial for rituals, battles, or journeys to ensure safety and success. This isn't just wearing your lucky socks, this is wearing your destiny-defining, spirit-guarding cloak. Historians still argue whether the primary driver for the elaborate status symbolism of textiles was a natural evolution of material culture reflecting wealth, or if it was deliberately cultivated by ruling classes to maintain social hierarchy and control through visible markers of difference. Was it organic, or was it engineered? The soft power of these textiles lay in their ability to communicate without words. They conveyed prestige, forged alliances, cemented peace, and visually defined the social landscape. They were the threads that held together the complex social and political fabric of the ancient archipelago, silent diplomats whispering tales of status, connection, and power with every fold and pattern. As you settle deeper, let the weight of these powerful fabrics press gently on your eyelids, reminding you that history is often told not just in battles and treaties, but in the quiet language of craft and cloth. You've journeyed through time, tracing the threads of ancient Filipino textiles from their humble origins in raw fibers to their elevated status as symbols of power, identity, and connection. You've seen how they spoke a language without words, negotiating alliances, marking status, and carrying the weight of tradition. But the story doesn't end in some dusty historical archive. These traditions, these skills, these patterns are very much alive, still breathing, still being woven into the fabric of modern Filipino identity. As you settle into the quiet, you can almost hear the rhythmic click-clack of a modern loom, perhaps in a small workshop nestled in a mountain village, or maybe in a bustling cultural centre in a city. The hands guiding the shuttle might be those of an elder, carrying generations of knowledge in their fingertips, or they could be younger hands, eager to learn, to preserve, to innovate. Keeping these ancient weaving traditions alive is a constant effort, a delicate balance between honouring the past and adapting to the present. It's not easy. The world moves fast, synthetic materials are cheaper, and the intricate, labour-intensive process of traditional weaving can feel like a relic in a fast-paced digital age. Convincing younger generations to dedicate years to mastering skills that might not offer immediate wealth is a challenge faced by many communities. But there's a growing recognition, both within the Philippines and globally, of the immense value these textiles hold, not just as beautiful objects, but as living history, tangible links to pre-colonial cultures that survived centuries of foreign influence. Efforts are underway across the archipelago to document techniques, preserve looms, support weavers, and create sustainable markets for their creations. You might find cultural foundations dedicated specifically to revitalizing traditions like the pina weaving of Aklan, transforming pineapple leaves into gossamer fine fures, or the weaving of the Tebli people in Mindanao, with its intricate patterns dictated by dreams. These organizations work to train apprentices, provide resources, and connect weavers directly with consumers, cutting out middlemen who might exploit their labor. Imagine the dedication it takes. Someone decides, okay, my grandmother spent her life perfecting this one specific knot pattern that tells the story of our ancestors. I'm going to spend the next decade learning it, even though I could probably make more money doing something else. That's commitment right there. It's like choosing to master ancient calligraphy when everyone else is just typing emojis. Bless them. A mainstream historical fact today is that several indigenous weaving traditions have been recognized by the Philippine government as national cultural treasures or important cultural properties, highlighting their significance to the nation's heritage and paving the way for increased support and protection. This isn't just a pat on the back, it's official acknowledgement that these aren't just crafts, they are cornerstones of cultural identity. These textiles also play a significant role in contemporary Filipino fashion and design. Designers are collaborating with traditional weavers, integrating ancient patterns and techniques into modern clothing and accessories. This fusion brings traditional textiles into new contexts, making them relevant and desirable to a younger global audience. It's pretty cool to see a centuries-old pattern pop up on a runway in Manila. New York, bro. Bridging a pose with a single thread. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might stumble upon is the use of traditional textile patterns in unexpected modern applications, like interior design, furniture upholstery, or even as digital art motifs, showing how the visual language of these ancient cloths continues to adapt and permeate different aspects of contemporary life, proving these patterns have serious staying power. Historians, anthropologists, and cultural preservationists still argue whether the modernization and commercialization of traditional weaving risk diluting the authenticity and sacred meanings embedded in the textiles, or if it's a necessary step for economic viability and cultural survival in the modern world. Is it evolution or erosion? The debate continues, much like trying to decide if pineapple belongs on pizza. Spoiler, it does sometimes. Ultimately, the soft power of ancient Filipino textiles continues. It's the power to connect us to our roots, to visually express identity and pride, and to sustain communities through the practice of ancestral skills. When you see a hablon weave from Iloilo or an inabel from Ilocos today, you're not just looking at a piece of fabric. You're witnessing the resilience of a culture, the dedication of artisans, and the enduring legacy of threads spun and woven across millennia. As the final threads of this journey are woven, let the thought of these enduring traditions settle softly in your mind. The hands that spun the fibres and guided the looms in ages past are echoed in the hands working today, keeping the patterns alive, whispering stories through cloth. It's a comforting thought, a reminder that even the most ancient skills can find a place in the modern world, continuing to weave beauty and meaning. The air grows still, the sounds of the day fading into a gentle hum. Your eyelids feel heavy, a soft weight pulling you down. You've travelled far tonight, across islands and centuries, guided by the quiet language of thread and fibre. The images begin to blur, the vibrant colours of ancient cloths, the rhythmic sway of looms, the feel of coarse abaca and fine piña beneath your fingertips. These stories, woven into the very fabric of the island's past, are now threads in the tapestry of your own dreams. There's nothing left to do but let go, to sink deeper into the quiet embrace of sleep, letting the gentle sounds and lingering thoughts drift away. Just breathe slowly and evenly. The journey is over for now. Rest.